Not a single person from my family showed up to my graduation. My parents went on a last-minute trip with my sister instead. But as I walked across the stage, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "Come home immediately." Followed by 35 missed calls. "Hi. My name's Isabelle Hart, 23 years old, and I have just completed the final chapter of my student life in finance at UCLA. It should have been the happiest day of my life, the day when years of effort, sleepless nights spent reading, juggling part-time jobs from waiting tables at a cafe to assisting in the library to unpaid internships at a small finance firm finally paid off. But from the very beginning, in my family, I was never the main character. I was more like a faint shadow standing behind the stage lights, where all the attention, all the praise, and all the pride of my parents were reserved entirely for Lily, my younger sister. Lily is only 20, radiant, beautiful, outspoken, and quickly became famous thanks to social media. With hundreds of thousands of followers on TikTok, every makeup video or travel clip she posted drew in tens of thousands of likes. My parents eagerly followed her every move, proudly boasting about her to relatives, friends, and neighbors. And me? I was always present in the house like some useful object, but never truly seen. My academic excellence, my full scholarship, the research awards I worked so hard for were barely acknowledged beyond a half-hearted remark. Good, that's fine. Meanwhile, if Lily posted a pretty photo or received a small sponsorship from a clothing brand, the whole family immediately celebrated with a party. Throughout my 4 years in college, I had to provide for almost everything myself. My scholarship covered most of the tuition, but to afford rent, food, and daily expenses, I worked from morning until late at night. There were nights when I finished my shift at 2 in the morning, dragging myself back to my tiny apartment, exhausted, only to turn on my laptop and study for the exam the next day. Yet I never complained, never dared to ask for more. I simply told myself that graduation day would be the worthy reward, the moment when my parents and Lily would sit proudly in the audience, clapping loudly as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma. I held on to that illusion for years, comforting myself through every lonely night. That day finally arrived. I woke up in my small room, morning sunlight streaming through the window. I brushed my hair neatly, slipped on the black graduation gown, and placed the square cap on my head, then sat in front of the mirror for a long time. In my reflection, I didn't just see brightness, but also the longing for recognition. On the desk lay the draft of the invitation I had sent my parents weeks ago. I had called, texted, reminded them more than once. They nodded, they promised they would come. I believed them, like a child who naively trusts the promises of her parents. But that morning, as I was fixing the light layer of makeup on my face before heading to the auditorium, my phone buzzed. A new notification appeared in the family group chat. It was a message from my mother. "Sweetheart, we can't make it today, something urgent came up. We'll make it up to you later." I froze. Moments later, Lily posted a story on Instagram, showing all three of them at the airport, beaming with carry-on bags, captioned, "Aspen trip number family time." In that frame, my family was complete except for me, the one in a graduation gown about to walk into the most important day of her life. I sat there stunned, the air sucked out of my chest. In that moment, I realized the truth I had been ignoring for years. To them, my graduation wasn't important enough. They had no problem abandoning it for a last-minute vacation with Lily. Have you ever been left behind by your family at the most important moment of your life? And today, where are you listening to my story from? Share your story in the comments so I know I'm not alone. The auditorium that day was decorated with bright blue and gold banners bearing UCLA's emblem. On the steps, clusters of families gathered with vibrant bouquets in hand, fathers adjusting ties for their sons, mothers wiping tears of pride before pulling their daughters into their arms. Laughter echoed, cameras clicked nonstop, voices called out to one another with joy. I walked slowly through the crowd, my hands gripping the invitation tucked in my bag, the same invitation I had hoped my parents would hold proudly in theirs. But around me, there were no familiar faces. No flowers, no congratulations, no embrace. Only a silence pressing heavy in my chest, like an emptiness that kept widening with every step. I ran into a few classmates. They proudly introduced me to their parents, holding bouquets of lavender and red roses, laughing brightly as they posed for keepsake photos. I forced a smile, heard myself say, "Thank you," when they congratulated me, but my eyes kept drifting unconsciously toward the row of seats I had asked the organizers to reserve for my family. 5 seats in the very front row, right by the main aisle, sat completely empty. Strangers were scattered in the rows behind, but those 5 spaces remained vacant, like a glaring wound in the middle of a sea of celebration. The ceremony began, the music rose, and the dean spoke about the difficult 4-year journey, about dreams and the determination of the new graduates. I listened to every word, but my mind drifted elsewhere. The image of my parents and Lily happily checking in at Aspen Airport haunted me, pressing heavily against each heartbeat. I wondered, did they think of me for even a second? Or were they already seated in first class, raising glasses of red wine, chatting about their ski trip, completely forgetting that their eldest child had just finished her student life with a graduation ceremony they had promised to attend? Names of students were called one by one. Cheers erupted across the hall, bouquets were tossed into the air, posters lifted high with messages like, "We're proud of you." I sat still, my hands gripping the edge of my seat, feeling my heart sink lower and lower. When my turn came, the announcer's voice rang out, "Isabelle Hart, Bachelor of Finance, University of California, Los Angeles." I rose, stepped into the aisle between the rows. Applause filled the auditorium, my friends shouted my name. I smiled awkwardly, forced myself to hold my head high, to believe this moment was still worthy, that my 4 years of resilience had not been in vain. But just as I placed my foot on the steps leading to the stage, my phone vibrated violently in the pocket of my gown. I froze for a split second, then kept walking. As my hand touched the diploma from the dean, the buzzing did not stop. After bowing and stepping aside, I quickly glanced at the screen, a message from my father. Only 3 words, cold and harsh. "Come home immediately." I stood frozen among the rows of students smiling for photos. Before I could make sense of it, the phone kept vibrating. One call, then another, then another. Within a few short minutes, the screen showed 35 missed calls, all from my mother and father. The sounds of celebration around me gradually warped into a distorted noise. I sat back down in my seat, my trembling hand silencing the phone. None of them were here, yet they were calling me over and over as if some urgent crisis demanded that I drop everything and rush home immediately. I looked around at the families embracing for photos, at friends beaming next to their loved ones. I bit my lip, forcing back tears. In the moment when I should have felt the most radiant, I only felt small, misplaced, and consumed by a rising confusion. What could possibly be so important that they would ignore my graduation, only to demand my presence at home this very instant? I kept asking myself, why is it that when I need them most, they vanish, and then the moment after, they treat me as if I must appear at their command? That emptiness pulled me back into my childhood, to the years when every injustice first took root and grew deeper with time. I remembered when I was 13, at a state-level science fair. I had worked tirelessly for months, building a model water filtration system from simple materials, measuring every detail, repeating the process dozens of times until it was complete. On award day, I stood on stage, my hands trembling as I held a glass trophy and a certificate. My eyes scanned the audience, searching for my parents' familiar faces. But they weren't there. On the way home, I sat on the bus clutching the trophy, scrolling through my phone, and saw a photo of Lily in a puffy dress, a tiny crown on her head at a teen beauty pageant, with our parents standing proudly on either side, smiling as if it were the most important moment of their lives. That photo pierced me like a blade, deep and unrelenting. I had longed for them to sit in the audience and clap for me, but that had never once been my reality. There was another time, when I was about 11, at a summer camp. During a rock climbing activity, I slipped, fell, and broke my arm. The pain was so sharp that tears streamed down my face. The camp supervisor called my mother. When she arrived and saw my swollen arm, she simply sighed. "You're stronger than this, you can handle it. Don't exaggerate." Then she turned away to chat about work with another parent. I sat alone on the bench, clutching my throbbing arm, swallowing my tears in silence. A few weeks later, when Lily tripped in the park and got a tiny scrape on her knee, my mother panicked, rushed her to the emergency room, bought her chocolate ice cream, and held her close, whispering, "My sweet baby, that must hurt so much. Let me take care of you." I stood by, watching Lily's radiant smile, even though her wound was nothing more than a small scratch. In that moment, I couldn't tell which pain cut deeper, the broken bone, or the feeling that my suffering and emotions never mattered. Holidays, Christmas, and birthdays only made the favoritism more obvious. I remembered my 16th birthday. My gift was a discounted notebook with a worn-out cover, handed over with an offhand remark. "You like writing, right? Use this." I forced a smile, thanked them, even as disappointment hollowed me inside. A month later, on Lily's birthday, the whole family took her to the mall to pick out the latest iPhone, wrapped in a shiny pink bow, followed by a grand cake party with nearly 30 guests. I sat in the corner, eating a slice of cake, forcing myself to smile as she blew out the candles. Christmas was no different. My presents were the kind that felt like afterthoughts: cheap wool gloves, patterned socks. Meanwhile, Lily always had designer dresses, makeup kits, even ski trips with her friends. Looking back, I realized the pain of today sitting alone at my graduation, staring at the empty row reserved for my family was not some sudden tragedy. It was the peak of a lifelong pattern of being overshadowed. From a young age, I had been taught that my joy, my pain, my achievements were always small, always undeserving of notice. And Lily, whether it was a smile or a tiny scratch, was enough to make the entire world of my family spin around her. I left the campus while everyone else lingered to take pictures, hugging their families and friends. On the road back to the small apartment in Westwood that I shared with a roommate, my phone kept buzzing in my pocket, the screen lighting up and going dark, again and again. Every time I pulled it out, the same names appeared: Dad. Then Mom. I deliberately ignored them, wanting them to taste the feeling of being abandoned, the same way I had been abandoned all day. But when I finally got home, slipped off the graduation gown that still smelled of new fabric, and collapsed onto the worn sofa with trembling hands placing the diploma on the table, the ringing started again. Relentless. At last, in a moment of anger mixed with curiosity, I pressed the button to answer. My father's face appeared on the screen. The hotel ceiling light above him cast shadows that deepened the lines in his forehead, his eyes filled with irritation. The first words out of his mouth weren't, "Congratulations," or "You did it." No, he didn't even bother to mention the graduation, the moment I had waited for my whole life. Instead, his voice came sharp and impatient. "Isabelle, finally you picked up. Listen, Lily is in big trouble. Her credit card is maxed out, the bank's been calling nonstop. She needs you to transfer money right away." I stared at him in shock. All the anger I had bottled up since the morning came surging back. I gave a bitter laugh and asked, "Do you even know what day it is today?" My father frowned, dodging the question. "Isabelle, don't play games. This is serious. You've got some savings, don't you? You're better at handling things, so now the family needs you to step up." His words struck me like a refrain I'd heard my entire life. When I earned scholarships, they only said I was saving the family money. When I worked long hours, they brushed it off with, "Isabelle's used to the hard stuff." And now, even as I held a diploma from a ceremony they couldn't bother to attend, they were asking me to rescue my sister from a mountain of debt caused by her reckless spending. I trembled as I answered, "You skipped my graduation to go to Aspen with Lily, and now you're calling me just to demand money to cover her debt. Have you ever once thought about how I feel? Even once?" Before I could finish, my mother's face appeared on the screen. She snatched the phone from my father, her voice sharp, laced with reproach. "Isabelle, don't be selfish. This is when your family needs you most. Your sister is panicking, don't you care about her?" I sat there, my heart pounding, her words slicing into me like blades. Selfish? I had worked for 4 years to support myself, never asking them for a single cent. I had endured being invisible at every milestone, and today, when I should have been embraced and congratulated, they were calling me selfish simply because I refused to shoulder Lily's reckless debt. In the background, I heard Lily's voice cut in. "Can you transfer the money tonight? The bank said if it's not paid, they'll close my card and ruin my credit. You don't want me to lose my reputation, do you?" I bit my lip so hard my face tensed with anger. Even now, Lily spoke as if it were only natural, as if the money I earned existed solely for her. I looked at the screen one last time, saw my parents waiting, saw Lily standing smugly with her arms crossed, and I drew a deep breath before saying firmly, "I am not responsible for Lily's mistakes." Then I hung up. The apartment suddenly felt suffocatingly silent. I buried my head in my hands as tears spilled uncontrollably. Never before had it been so clear. They didn't value me. They didn't value my work or my achievements. To them, I was nothing more than a tool, a walking wallet, the resourceful one they could lean on whenever they pleased. In that moment, within those 4 empty walls, I realized I had crossed into something new. The disappointment I felt today was no longer just a small scratch on my heart. It was a deep fracture, one that would inevitably split wide open and push me out of the unfair family cycle I had been trapped in for so long. The next morning, as I sat at the small kitchen table, staring at a bowl of cereal gone soggy from sitting too long in milk, my phone lit up again and again. I sighed, assuming it was more calls from my parents, but this time the list of senders was longer. The first message was from Aunt Carol. "Isabelle, I heard your sister is having some trouble. She's still young, she doesn't know how to manage money. You're her sister, you have to step in. How could you turn your back on her at a time like this?" I read it once, then again, my chest tightening. Not a single word of congratulations for yesterday, not one question about how my graduation went. Only accusations that I was careless, heartless. Right after came a message from Uncle Robert. "Isabelle, Lily is your sister. Don't be stubborn. Money can always be earned again, but family bonds, once broken, can never be repaired." I bit my lip until I tasted blood. They called it family bonds when what they really meant was forcing me to take on her debt. More messages followed from my grandmother, from a distant aunt, even from relatives I barely spoke to. All with the same tone, as if rehearsed, "You can't abandon Lily. Your family needs you. Don't be so selfish, hen." Not one person, absolutely no one mentioned that just yesterday I had graduated from college, becoming the first degree holder in the entire family line. There were no flowers, no cards, no words of encouragement. Only the unspoken assumption that my duty was to bail Lily out, just as I had done all throughout my childhood and into adulthood. I set the phone down, and my mind drifted back to other moments like this. The day I received my UCLA acceptance letter, I ran home, my heart pounding as I handed the envelope to my mother. She opened it, glanced at it, then simply nodded. "That's good, at least we don't have to worry about tuition." That evening, we had dinner together, but the conversation wasn't about me. It was about Lily making the top 5 in a teen beauty pageant. My father eagerly discussed hiring a photographer, investing in her wardrobe, while I sat in silence, chewing rice that tasted bitter in my mouth. A year later, when I received a full scholarship for the new academic year, something only 2 people in the entire class achieved, I rushed home, excited, clutching the confirmation letter. My father glanced at it and muttered a single short sentence. "Good, that saves the family a lot of money." No hug, no. "I'm proud of you." I forced a smile, but inside, a cold emptiness spread. Meanwhile, if Lily received something as small as a free lipstick from a minor brand, the whole family would instantly throw a celebration, call relatives to brag, snap photos, and post them on Facebook with proud captions. I used to try to brush off the difference, telling myself that at least I still had value in a different way. But now, with relatives flooding my phone with messages of blame, not one of them seeing me as a person who had just reached a monumental milestone, I finally understood, in their eyes. I wasn't a daughter worthy of love. I was only the one responsible for cleaning up every mess Lily left behind. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes burning. Memories came rushing back like a fast-forwarded reel of film. When Lily lost the gold bracelet our grandmother gave her, I was forced to take the blame because you're the older sister. You should have watched her. When Lily failed a class in high school, I had to tutor her all summer, even while I was drowning in SAT prep. When Lily had her grand birthday parties, I was the one stuck in the kitchen cooking and washing dishes, only to sit in a corner later and watch her be treated like a princess. I was never allowed to be angry, never given the right to say no. Whenever I slipped and protested, the same refrain always followed. Isabelle, you're the older sister, you have to sacrifice. Rereading the messages on my phone, I wasn't even surprised anymore. It was all just a continuation of the same worn-out script, where I played the role of the responsible sister and Lily shone as the radiant pride. But this time, the difference was that I could see its truth clearly. I was no longer the 13-year-old clutching a science trophy on a bus, quietly swallowing tears because my parents were too busy taking pictures with Lily. I was no longer the 16-year-old receiving a cheap notebook for her birthday while her sister got a brand new phone. I had grown up. I had pushed myself through 4 years of college without their support. And now, as they continued to treat me like their lifeline, all I felt inside was a hollow ache mixed with a slow-burning fury. I came to a painful but liberating realization. To my family, I would never be seen as an independent person with my own successes, emotions, and worth. I was only a means to ensure Lily's spotlight never dimmed. And if I kept obeying, kept rescuing them, then I would spend the rest of my life as nothing more than a shadow. One Tuesday morning, I was sitting at my small desk in the apartment, opening my laptop to polish a job application when the phone rang. I froze for a moment, surprised to see the call was from the bank. My heartbeat quickened, since I had never received a direct call from them before. I picked up, and a woman's polite yet faintly worried voice came through. "Hello, Miss Hart. We're calling to confirm a transfer order from your account to another account. The transfer is for $5,200. Would you like to confirm this transaction?" I went cold, gripping the phone tighter, my mouth suddenly dry. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "I never requested any transfer." "Oliver." The woman on the other end slowly read the details. The transaction had been made online, from an IP address located in Santa Monica, the very city where my parents lived. I froze, my blood turning to ice. No further explanation was needed. I knew instantly what had happened. They had used the old login information I once gave them back in high school, when my parents said they wanted to help manage my finances so I wouldn't spend recklessly. I had never changed the password, clinging to some small piece of trust, some tiny hope that they would respect at least that boundary. And now, that fragile trust had been trampled without mercy. I immediately instructed the bank to cancel the transaction. The employee agreed right away, her voice full of sympathy. "We suspect this may be fraudulent activity. Luckily, you confirmed in time." I thanked her, but as I hung up, my entire body trembled with rage. They hadn't just abandoned me on the most important day of my life. They hadn't just called demanding I cover Lily's debts. Now, they had crossed into outright theft. I called my mother. After only 2 rings, her voice came through, light and deceptively gentle. "Isabelle, I was just about to call you." I gripped the phone tightly. "Mom, why is there a transaction from my account $5,200 transferred to Lily? Do you know anything about this?" There was a brief silence, not the silence of surprise, but of someone calculating how best to respond. Then her voice returned, calm and casual, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Oh, Isabelle, don't be so tense. We're family. Helping each other a little isn't stealing. You can't call it theft when it's for someone you love." I went numb. Those words echoed in my mind, warped and bitter. Family, the sacred word I had clung to all these years, had been twisted into nothing more than an excuse to justify exploitation. "Not stealing," she said, while her hand had reached into my account and taken the money I had scraped together through months of long hours and careful saving. In that moment, something inside me broke. The last thread of trust, the fragile bond I had still been holding onto, plummeted into an abyss. I wanted to scream into the phone, to shout at her about how deeply they had betrayed me. But my throat locked, leaving only ragged breaths. I hung up, threw the phone onto the table, and sank to the floor. The room around me was silent, except for the pounding of my heart. My eyes drifted to the corner, where my graduation diploma leaned against the wall, not yet framed. It seemed to stare back at me, a reminder that every achievement I had was built by me alone, without their help, without their recognition. I tried to force a smile, but the tears came anyway, falling and falling, unstoppable. That night, I sat alone under the dim yellow light, my diploma lying on the table in front of me. Through my sobs, I whispered, "I did all of this on my own. I never needed them." The words sounded fragile, yet in my mind they echoed like a vow. I thought back to every meager paycheck from waiting tables at the cafe, every long shift at the library, every dull internship where I still persevered, everything I did to build a small savings, the very money that almost slipped through my fingers that day. To them, even the little I had never truly belonged to me. I lowered my head onto the table, drowning in pain and betrayal. But beneath the tears, something else was forming, a cold, sharp clarity. I realized that if I kept letting them into my life, if I continued to leave the door open, this would never be the last time. They would keep going, keep taking my money, my effort, my peace, even my dignity. And I understood then that the time had come to decide. Would I keep being the sacrificial shadow, or would I rise and claim my own life? After that night, I knew I couldn't go on living passively, letting my family do whatever they wanted. The first thing I did the next morning was change every password: bank accounts, emails, shopping apps, social media. I spent the whole morning at it, my hands trembling but steady with resolve, typing in new strings of characters as though I were building my final wall of defense. When the system flashed the words, "password updated," it felt like a rope had been cut from around my neck. I also called the bank to activate two-factor authentication and moved every cent of my savings into a new account in my name only. For the first time in years, I felt truly in control. Cutting off contact wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I muted the family group chat, letting their accusatory, mocking, or pleading messages fall into silence. My phone buzzed with calls, but I no longer picked up. The missed calls piled up, and instead of guilt, I felt a strange sense of peace. I no longer owed them answers. I no longer had to run whenever they called. I was Isabelle, and I was learning how to live for myself. Just a few weeks later, I was fortunate enough to land a job as a financial analyst at a startup in San Francisco. The day I received the acceptance email, I sat frozen on my bed, laughing and crying at the same time. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of the city, where each morning sunlight streamed through the window and the sound of streetcars echoed outside. The work was far from easy at first, analyzing data, writing reports, often staying in the office late into the night. But unlike before, my efforts were finally being recognized. After one successful presentation to the management team, my supervisor, a woman named Karen, smiled and patted my shoulder. "You have an eye for detail and a clear, structured way of thinking. Keep it up." Those few words were enough to make me feel seen, something I had craved from my parents for years but never received. Over time, I began to be trusted with larger projects. I learned how to collaborate in teams, how to present ideas clearly and with confidence. After 6 months, I received a raise, and Karen even introduced me to some outside partners. Thanks to that, I picked up a few consulting contracts, and my income gradually became more stable. From a fresh graduate whose bank account barely covered living expenses, I was now building a savings fund of my own, safe this time, untouchable by anyone else. I kept every success to myself, never posting on social media, never sharing with relatives. I had learned that silence could be a form of protection. My new life slowly took on colors I had never known before. I signed up for a yoga class near my apartment, where each morning I could relax my body and learn to listen to myself. I started attending networking events, awkward at first among so many strangers, but gradually realizing there were people who genuinely cared about my skills and my story. A colleague named Derek often invited me to lunch, shared career advice, and encouraged me to expand my connections. Bit by bit, I no longer felt alone. I was no longer drowning in anyone's shadow. I also learned how to savor the simplest joys: a hot cup of coffee after work, a good book on a quiet weekend night, runs in Golden Gate Park with colleagues. Each of those moments reminded me that happiness didn't need my parents' approval or the shallow spotlight that had always been handed to Lily. Happiness could come from my own effort and my own choices, from living true to who I was. Looking back, I could see clearly that all those painful years had forged a strength in me that had now become my foundation. Without those times of being forgotten, I might never have learned to stand on my own. Without their blatant betrayals, I might still be naive enough to believe that love would someday arrive. But now, I no longer waited for it. I chose to walk my own path, and each step, no matter how slow, carried a freedom I had never known. One late afternoon, after finishing an important presentation, I returned to my apartment and opened the closet to take out my diploma. I placed it in the wooden frame I had just bought. Hanging it on the wall, right in the center of the living room, I smiled. It was no longer a diploma left leaning in a corner, a reminder of painful memories. Now it stood as a symbol of independence, proof that I had done it without anyone's help, without needing recognition from anyone but myself. In that moment, I knew true happiness had begun to bloom, born from old wounds, nurtured by the resilience of my own heart. About half a year after I moved to San Francisco and began rebuilding my new life, I unexpectedly received a message from my mother. "Come home for dinner this weekend. The family misses you." The message was short, even gentle, but the moment I read it, suspicion stirred in me. For the past 6 months, they had barely reached out, aside from Lily's occasional sly texts. "You're rich now, right? Don't forget me." And now, out of nowhere, an invitation to dinner, because they missed me? I sat staring at my phone screen, knowing this couldn't be just an innocent family meal. Still, I agreed, not because I believed their words, but because I wanted to see exactly what they were plotting. That evening, I drove back to the old house in Santa Monica. The moment I stepped through the door, the atmosphere felt strangely stiff. The living room lights were bright, the dining table set with an almost staged elegance, yet there was no warmth. My father sat in his armchair as if presiding over a board meeting. My mother wore a forced smile, and Lily sat upright, her eyes sparkling in a way that felt rehearsed. I gave a faint smile and pulled out a chair. Dinner began with strained small talk. No one asked how I was really living, how work was going. Every compliment and question circled only around Lily, her recent spa trip to Palm Springs, her thousands of new followers. I sat quietly, listening, as if it were all too familiar. When the main course was served, my father cleared his throat and spoke in a deliberately measured tone. "Actually, tonight there's another special reason. We wanted to share with you an incredible opportunity." I set my fork down and sighed inwardly. And then, just as I expected, Lily pulled out a pastel pink folder, placed it neatly on the table, and smiled with confidence. "Sis, I'm about to open a luxury boutique spa downtown. It's a big project with the potential to attract high-end clients. If you join as an investor, just $200,000 will secure you 40% ownership. This is a golden opportunity for our family to succeed together." I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence hang. Her words sounded like a memorized pitch, polished but hollow. I glanced at my parents, their eyes fixed on me, filled with expectation but edged with pressure. Instead of anger, I felt something closer to amusement. 6 months without a single word of concern, and now they staged a family dinner just to turn me into an unwilling investor. I nodded slowly, my voice calm. "That does sound interesting. But let me ask you something. Did your other potential investors know the bank already declined you? Did they know 3 major financial institutions reviewed this proposal and cut it off at the very first round? The entire room fell silent. Lily's face paled, her smile twisting awkwardly. My father frowned. Isabelle, how could you say that in front of everyone? I kept my tone steady. Because it's the truth, and she should be honest with anyone she asks for money, instead of painting a fantasy that doesn't exist. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder I had prepared in advance. It contained the profile of the small financial consulting firm I had been building over the past 6 months. Signed contracts, revenue growth charts, client evaluations. I placed it on the table and slid it toward them. I'm not a naive student anymore. I know how to read numbers, I know how to assess risk. And most importantly, I know that the people sitting here once took money from me without my permission. So, I'm sorry, but I won't invest in anyone who's stolen from me. The words cut through the silence like a blade. My mother's face drained of color. My father opened his mouth to speak but fell quiet. Lily flushed red, stammering. You're overreacting. I stood, calmly adjusting my coat. No, Lily. For the first time in my life, I'm being honest. I am no longer the emergency wallet, no longer the shadow who sacrifices without question. From now on, if you want success, you'll have to find it yourself. I have my own life, and I won't trade it away to preserve anyone else's illusion. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, no one called out. Only the heavy, suffocating silence remained. As I opened the door, the Santa Monica ocean breeze swept in, cool and sharp, carrying away the last of the weight on my shoulders. For the first time in years, I left that house without guilt. I had spoken the words that needed to be spoken, and more importantly, I had freed myself from the role of reluctant rescuer my family had forced on me. Just 2 weeks after that tense evening in Santa Monica, after my refusal and departure, the news reached me in the most unexpected way. A colleague at the consulting firm sent me a link to a small article in the local financial paper. Luxury downtown spa, project loses all investors. I skimmed it, my heartbeat slowing as Lily's name appeared in the description. The young founder failed to secure backing after multiple banks and investment funds simultaneously declined her application. The article was short, but it was more than enough for me to understand. The door Lily had been dreaming of had slammed shut. In the days that followed, the rumors spread faster than I ever expected. A longtime client told me he'd overheard in a meeting that Lily Hart's spa proposal is a ticking time bomb. No one wants to touch it. My sister's reputation, the TikTok princess, who was once celebrated, had now become a laughingstock among small business circles. I didn't feel glee, but I also didn't feel pity. It all seemed like the natural consequence. When you build castles on sand, the waves will eventually wash them away. Less than a month later, I received a call from my mother. Her voice no longer carried the sharp edge of blame. Instead, it was broken with sobs. Isabelle, do you know what's happening? Every investor has pulled out. Lily owes so much. Your father and I had to mortgage the house just to cover part of the initial loan. You've changed, Isabelle. You're so cold now. You've destroyed this family. I sat in silence, listening, my chest tightening but no longer aching like before. When she paused, waiting for me to speak, I answered evenly. No, Mom. I didn't destroy this family. The way you treated me all these years is what destroyed it. Do you remember how many times my accomplishments were brushed aside while every spotlight was thrown on Lily? I am no longer the girl who silently carried everything. I chose to stand up. On the other end, I heard my mother sniffle, then fall quiet. Perhaps she wanted to argue, but for the first time in my life, she had no words. I hung up and sat motionless, staring out the window of my small San Francisco apartment. The afternoon sun stretched across the building opposite, and I felt something strange. My heart was weightless. I wasn't rejoicing in their downfall, but I also no longer bore the crushing guilt. All my childhood and youth, I had been conditioned to believe I was responsible for my sister's happiness and success. Now, as they faced the consequences of their favoritism and poor choices, I finally felt free. No more accusatory texts, no more calls demanding unconditional rescue. I knew they would still find ways to blame me, but the truth was undeniable. This family didn't fracture because I refused an investment. It fractured because for years, they let love turn into blind favoritism. In the days that followed, I continued going to work as usual, attending yoga classes in the mornings and joining a networking event on the weekend. I watched my colleagues laugh and share passionate stories about their futures, and I felt as though I had fully stepped into another world. A world where I was no longer bound by the injustices of family, a world where I could finally choose my own path. For the first time in years, I felt truly lighthearted. Light because I was no longer chained to the role of the sister who carries the weight. Light because I could finally hold my head high without fear of comparison or dismissal. I knew the road ahead would be long, filled with challenges and moments of loneliness, but it was my road and mine alone. A year after that fateful confrontation, my life had transformed completely. I was no longer in the cramped, damp apartment of my early post-graduation days. Instead, I had moved into a new apartment high above the city, overlooking the San Francisco Bay. Every morning, when I pulled open the curtains, golden sunlight poured across the shimmering water, and white sails drifted slowly by. That sight brought both peace and strength, reminding me how far I had come from the girl abandoned at her own graduation to a woman who stood on her own, building her life by her own hands. On the day I moved in, I spent the entire afternoon hanging my bachelor's degree in its wooden frame right in the center of my living room. I didn't hang it to show off to anyone, but to remind myself that it was a symbol of resilience. I looked at it whenever I felt tired, to remember that I had once overcome invisibility, dismissal, and even betrayal from my own family. That diploma was no longer tucked away in a dark corner as it had been before, but placed in the most prominent spot in my home just as I had finally claimed my rightful place in my own life. I decided to host a small gathering to celebrate a new year of life. The guests weren't relatives or anyone who had once called me selfish, but the people I had met along my journey of independence, colleagues who encouraged me, new friends from yoga, and a few people from networking events who had become confidants. I prepared simple dishes, played soft jazz, and bought a few bottles of wine for everyone to raise their glasses together. As guests arrived, the apartment filled with laughter and lively conversation. Standing in the kitchen, I looked out into the living room where everyone was gathered, and a warmth rose within me that I had never felt from my own blood family. Throughout the evening, we shared stories about work, about failures we had picked ourselves up from, and about dreams still waiting to be realized. No one compared me to Lily. No one diminished my accomplishments. No one demanded that I sacrifice. They saw me as I truly was Isabelle, a woman with intelligence, determination, and moments of vulnerability. Amid the laughter, I suddenly realized this was my family. Not the people tied to me by blood, but those who truly saw me and valued me. When the night came to an end, I stood by the window, gazing at the city lights reflected on the bay. In my hand was a glass of wine, and beside me a few friends lingered, helping to tidy up. I smiled softly, whispering to myself, I've walked this path on my own 2 feet, and this time, I am no longer invisible. The words echoed in my heart like a final punctuation mark on the painful past, and like a door opening wide to the future. Since that day, I no longer waited for congratulatory cards from my parents, nor did I hope for hollow words of praise. I came to understand that I had lost a family bound by blood, but at the same time, I had found another kind of family, a chosen family. A family where I was loved and valued, not for what I could provide, not in comparison to anyone else, but simply because I was myself. And I want to say this to you, the one listening to my story today. Sometimes, family is not the people who share your blood. Real family is the people who stand by you in your darkest moments, the ones who see you, believe in you, and rejoice when you succeed. I lost one family, but I also found the one that was truly mine. So if you have ever been abandoned at your most important moment, if you have ever felt invisible in your own home, please don't believe that your worth depends on them. Your worth lies in your courage to rise, to walk forward, and to seek out the people who truly deserve you. And before I end, I want to ask you one question. Have you ever been abandoned by your family in the most important moment of your life? And today, where are you listening to this story from? Share your story in the comments. Thank you for listening.